The heartwarming tale of Keanu Reeves saving a dog from its owner's neglected. In a quiet, upscale neighborhood tucked away in the heart of the city, there lived a man named Richard Whitmore. Richard was the epitome of success in the eyes of his peers, wealthy, powerful, and influential. With his expansive mansion, imported cars, and a career that spanned decades, Richard seemed to have everything a man could wish for. Yet despite all his achievements, he lacked one essential thing: kindness. Richard's life was characterized by an endless pursuit of material gain. His relationships were transactional, and even his beloved dog, a large golden retriever named Max, seemed to be another possession he could display to others. But unlike his carefully curated life, Richard's relationship with Max was strained at best. Max had once been a playful, energetic puppy, but over the years, the neglect and lack of attention had worn him down. The dog was no longer the cheerful companion he once was, and the bond between them was distant. Richard had always considered himself too busy for emotional attachment. Max was left alone in the backyard, with only a bowl of food and water to sustain him. The backyard itself was a small, fenced-off area, far from the lush green spaces that dogs deserve. The yard was often neglected too, filled with scattered toys and half-dried puddles of water from last week's rain. But Richard was oblivious to it all. Max's sad eyes and drooping posture became background noise in his busy world. One day, as fate would have it, Richard's life took an unexpected turn when a new neighbor moved in next door. The arrival of the new neighbor was a source of much excitement in the area. The rumors had already spread. This was no ordinary person. It was none other than Keanu Reeves. Keanu was known across the globe not just for his acting career, but for his down-to-earth nature, his generosity, and his love for animals. Stories of his acts of kindness and humility were legendary, but for all his fame, Keanu was as humble as they come. When he moved into the quiet neighborhood, the media didn't swarm, and the neighborhood residents gave him the space he craved. He lived a modest life in a modest home. Nothing grand, no opulence, just simplicity and peace. Keanu quickly made himself known to his neighbors, always greeting them with a warm smile and a handshake. But it wasn't until one afternoon that he truly became acquainted with Richard. It was a hot summer day, and Keanu was out for a walk in the neighborhood. He had just returned from a trip and was looking forward to some peace and quiet when something unusual caught his eye. He had been strolling down the street when he heard a faint whimpering sound coming from the direction of Richard's mansion. Concerned, Keanu made his way toward the sound, his instincts telling him that something wasn't right. As he approached Richard's property, he saw the dog, Max, lying motionless on the grass. His fur, once golden and gleaming, was matted and dull. The dog seemed to be staring into the distance, his eyes glazed over with a sense of deep sadness. Keanu's heart sank at the sight. He knew right away that this wasn't just a lazy dog, it was a dog in distress. Keanu approached cautiously, calling out softly, "Hey there, boy." Max's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Keanu knelt down to get a closer look and noticed that Max's ribs were visible, his body too thin for comfort. The dog was malnourished and dehydrated. At that moment, Richard emerged from his house, oblivious to the concern on Keanu's face. He walked over, his steps confident and quick, as though he were approaching another one of his possessions. He looked down at the scene, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face when he saw Keanu kneeling next to Max. "Is there a problem, neighbor?" Richard asked, his tone curt. Keanu stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on the sad dog. "I think your dog needs help," he said gently. "He doesn't look well." Richard scoffed, waving off the comment. "Max is fine. He's just getting old. Dogs have their ups and downs, you know. It's no big deal." Keanu wasn't convinced. He couldn't just walk away from a creature in such clear distress. "Richard, I'm not sure that's the case," Keanu replied, his voice calm but firm. "This dog is starving. He looks dehydrated. He needs care." Richard raised an eyebrow. "You're making a fuss over nothing. It's just a dog, Keanu." But Keanu wasn't going to back down. "It's not just a dog, Richard. He's a living being, and he deserves respect and care. You're neglecting him, and I don't think that's right." Richard felt a flush of anger rise in his chest. He had never liked being told how to live his life, and especially not by someone he barely knew. "I'm busy, Keanu," he snapped. "I've got a life to run. I don't have time to coddle a dog. Keanu didn't flinch. He stood there looking at Max, his heart heavy with sadness. That's exactly the problem, Richard. You're so wrapped up in your world that you've forgotten what it means to show kindness. Max doesn't need a rich man with a busy schedule. He needs a friend. He needs someone who will care for him. Richard turned his back on Keanu and started to walk toward the house. I don't need a lecture from you, he muttered. Keanu took a deep breath and made his decision. Fine, but I'm not leaving this dog like this. Without another word, he knelt down to Max's level and gently placed his hand on the dog's head. The dog didn't react, but Keanu could feel the warmth of Max's body. He was still alive, but barely. Keanu picked up his phone and called a nearby animal shelter. Within the hour, a team arrived with water, food, and medical supplies. The shelter staff quickly began tending to Max, carefully examining his condition and providing immediate care. They reassured Keanu that they would take Max in and help him recover, but it would take time. As the shelter workers loaded Max into the van, Keanu turned to Richard, who was now standing at the edge of his yard, watching the scene unfold. You should come with me, Richard, Keanu said, his voice soft but full of conviction. See how this dog's life changes when he's treated with love. Richard hesitated, his pride and arrogance making it hard for him to accept. But something in Keanu's voice struck a chord within him. He had always prided himself on being in control, but for the first time, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't doing things the right way. After a long pause, Richard sighed and walked toward Keanu. Fine, he said begrudgingly. I'll come. Keanu smiled, but it was a smile full of understanding, not victory. The two of them drove together to the shelter, where Richard witnessed firsthand the difference that love and care could make. Max was already showing signs of improvement, his coat starting to regain its shine, his energy slowly returning. Over the next few weeks, Richard visited Max at the shelter regularly. He began to understand what Keanu had meant. It wasn't just about providing the bare minimum for an animal. It was about forming a bond, showing kindness, and respecting the life of another living being. Eventually, Richard adopted Max and brought him back home. The change in both of them was profound. Richard's heart softened, and he began to see the world in a new light. Max, once a sad, neglected dog, was now a joyful, healthy companion, running around the backyard with a smile on his face. Keanu continued to be a quiet presence in the neighborhood, offering advice and friendship when needed. But it was his simple act of stepping in to save a dog that changed Richard's life forever. And in the end, it wasn't just Max who had been saved, it was Richard too.